A smidgy bit nervous to be back at this again. I'm a smidgy bit nervous. Hey guys, welcome back to Babblings of a 20-something. Babblings 2.0. Come here, do you want to be in it? Do you want to say hello? Come here, you can come say hello. Come on. Celine's coming to say hello. Come here. The microphone's up here if you want to say hello. Oh, what do you have to say? Do you want to say anything? Okay, no. We love you, Celine. Welcome back to Babblings of a 20-something. My name is Allie, and I am your host. It is Babblings 2.0. If this is your first time listening, which it's probably not, this is just for the handful of people that were like, Allie, are you going to do your podcast again? And those are my family and friends, which I love you. And so you're probably not new, and you probably know exactly who I am, but if you don't, this is Babblings of a 20-something. This is my video, audio, diary, podcast. Now that it's a 2.0, has morphed into something else, which I will kind of get into. Not morphed into something else, but it's just become a new version of itself, which is exciting. A more polished version, if you will. So I started Babblings of a 20-something last year. It's probably literally been a year. Yeah, a little over a year since I put out my last episode. And it has taken that whole year for me to get it together. I mean, a couple things did happen. This is a new place. This is a new couch. I moved. It is kind of hard to tell because the background looks exactly the same. But it is I don't know. Yeah, this is a totally different place. I moved back to Washington, D.C. From Ohio. I went to middle school and high school in Washington, D.C. I graduated from here, so a lot of my family is down here. I was really excited to move back, but it has definitely been an adjustment. I'm no longer a realtor, which I was the last time I put an episode out. I now manage a dance studio and teach dance, which I don't know if I've ever really talked about that before. I must have talked about it in the last season, but I grew up dancing and danced my whole life, and I've taught dance since I was in high school. So it is really exciting to be back in that space, to have like a career and get paid to do what I like and love to do, and something that I'm like good at, and also brings me joy and happiness and not stress and not anxiety, is really exciting. And we're also sitting in my brand new apartment, which I did manifest, and maybe I will tell that story one day if I ever feel like being like, here's how to manifest something. But I'm in my new apartment, which I love. Celine is a quite newer addition. We're going on 3 months together. We're going on 3 months together, which is exciting. She's just about 1 year old, and I have always wanted a black cat. Talk about manifesting something. I truly, truly have waited years to get a cat. I have told people in the past that I've dated, don't get me a cat. I've told family, my mom would never have wanted me to get a cat, but don't get me a cat. And I think that was all for a reason, because I was meant to have Celine, and she was meant to be mine and just mine, at least for now. Right, Celine? If you're watching her on video, I'm sorry. She's being so embarrassing. Celine, you're on camera. She doesn't know she's on camera. Oh no, am I one of those moms that put their kids on camera? The thing is, I don't see Celine as my kid. I see her as like my equal. Yeah, I do. I see her as kind of my equal, and it's funny because I was really excited to get a cat, and I love how cats are. I've always wanted a black cat. I think they're so beautiful. It's a little magical. Celine is magical, but I love cats because, they're always like smarter than you and like looking at you like you're dumb. But Celine is so young, like she doesn't really I feel like she hasn't earned her like street cred yet. And so she doesn't look at me like, Allie, you're being dumb. Like, we're just out here vibing together, for better or for worse. So I can't wait to grow together, because in a couple of years, we're both going to be like really old hags and just like have all of our wisdom and be like, look at these dumb motherfuckers. So yeah, I moved, I changed careers. That happened. I in the same week, really got a new car, moved to back to my old city to a new apartment with a new job, and it was quite fast. It happened pretty fast. But it's one of those things where, like, once I made that decision and that's what I wanted to do, everything just started falling into place. A big part of me was just trusting my intuition and trusting that things would work out, and they did magnificently. So let this be chapter 20 of careers / jobs / lives that I've had, and may I always be an example that you can literally always start over. No, if anything, I've realized that I am not somebody that is driven to have like one single career. I just don't think that's in the cards for me of like, I'm going to do this one thing for the rest of my life, or I'm going to like work here and work my way up to the top, or I'm going to own this one business. I have lots of dreams and ideas and goals and businesses that I want to start, or consulting that I want to do, creative ideas, go back to school. And I love what I'm doing now. I'm loving teaching. I'm loving managing. But I know that I just roll with the punches. I'm ever evolving and I have to keep changing. Came across this quote on TikTok. Hold on, I'm going to look it up so that I know who it's by. This quote is by Anais Nin. I hope that I pronounced her name correctly. I did look her up the other day, and she was a poet, a performer. She was a super multifaceted, creative woman that I definitely want to look into more. But yeah, after I saw this quote, I was like, whoa, so relatable. Here's the quote. I take pleasure in my transformations. I look quiet and consistent, but few know how many women there are in me. And I think that really resonated with me because I do think that people probably see me as quiet or consistent or practical, or some people could see me that way on the outside. But people that really know me know that I'm constantly transforming and becoming somebody new or learning something new, transforming the way that I do something, reanalyzing myself or the way that I do things. And I carry, and this isn't something that probably very few people know, but I really do and have lately been consciously carrying all the transformations and different versions of myself. I'm always at the same time me, but 16-year-old me, but 3-year-old me. They're always in me. And I've just really been working with that energy and embracing it and looking to them for guidance or encouragement, or recognizing how I would approach a situation in one part of my life versus now, versus how I may approach it in years to come. And besides the versions of myself, I've also really heavily been carrying all of the women in my life that have come before me and my ancestors, and looking at what I've been able to accomplish that they weren't able to accomplish, and the choices that I've been able to make to free myself of situations that they weren't able to, in order to use my voice and speak my truth and be creative and like do this like dumb podcast stuff in my apartment, you know? And I've had to really come to terms with appreciating my transformation and not looking at it like I'm always starting over because I'm failing. Like with real estate, I think not a lot of people, but there were a handful of people that, had said some things, nothing like mean or ever or passive aggressive. Like it was just like, you did so well, like, it doesn't work out for everyone, things like that. But I did not leave real estate. And this doesn't, not to say this in like an uppity way, but I feel like I didn't stop real estate because I wasn't good at it, or because I didn't see the trajectory to be good and to really make it a solid career. I was doing pretty well, and then I realized that it just wasn't what I wanted to do, and I realized that eventually I wanted to move, or that it was a little too not good for my mental health, a little too anxiety inducing to be a part of, to continue doing long term. And so I very actively and purposefully scaled back things that I was doing. The last 2 months I was giving away, referrals or leads because I knew that I wasn't wanting to do that. I didn't stop it because I wasn't good at it, or because I wasn't going to be good at it or really create something out of it. And I could have. And I think that's something that I've really had to learn is like, you don't have to do things just because you can. You don't have to do things for other people. You don't have to meet their expectations. And you don't have to do things just because you can. Just because I can do that, or just because I could do this and it could make me this amount of money and set me up in this way or whatever, doesn't mean that I had to do that. It didn't spark joy in me. But it taught me so much, though. It taught me so much. And it made me realize that I've done all of these things. I've been all these different people or positions or roles or learned these skills to culminate into the person that I am today with the skills and experience that I have to create something new or step into an existing role and bring something new to it. I'm multifaceted because I've taught myself a lot of things and because I've done a lot of different things. And I wasn't just like failing and starting over. It wasn't just, oh, Allie's just searching or Allie just doesn't know what she wants to do. I was really collecting information, and I'm now leaning into that. I'm leaning into that being my path of constantly transforming and changing to collect nuggets from different places to bring for the future or for whatever is next or whatever I'm going to create next. I look back at real estate and it helps me look at everything now from a lens of you never know what opportunity is going to unlock for you. And I mean that to say, I thought real estate would unlock certain opportunities in a way of financial opportunities, career opportunities. I thought, that's what I was getting into it for. I didn't realize the opportunity that real estate was going to present to me was honing in on my conversation skills, my social skills, my personable skills. I'm really honing in my ability to talk to people and work with people and figure out problems and how to solve them and how to navigate them. And it also gave me so much autonomy in my life. I had, between COVID and then real estate, I was able to kind of have this juxtaposition. No, that's not the right word. That's not the right word. I was able to have this kind of like these coinciding events. Juxtaposition would be like the opposite. These like coinciding events or time where I was able to really feel what it was like to hone in on what I really wanted, how I really wanted to spend my time, what I really wanted out of a job, how I wanted to make money, and that I could create something for myself if I wanted to. I mean, real estate really unlocked me and my potential, I feel, really helps me tap into something that I didn't know was there, gave me a voice, and changed my trajectory that I was on to get me to where I needed to be, to get me here and in this place. And that's why you just have to go with the flow sometimes. And if you're like me and people see you as a searcher or you see yourself as a searcher and I'm just hard on myself. I'm hard on myself for not looking like what other people look like as far as success or having a different trajectory than other people do. But lately, I've been trying to just be emboldened by it and embrace it and realize that I'm just really clever, creative, and tricky. And I've collected a lot of gems. I've been getting a lot of dragons have been coming up a lot for me. And I've really been connecting with dragons and how they hoard their treasure and their gems and to protect it, but those that are worthy may be able to have access. One of the things now that we're going to do each episode is that I'm going to pull a card for you guys. I think I probably talked about it in the last season that I was learning tarot, but I've definitely still been continuing and putting it into practice, into my daily practice, tarot and oracle cards. I struggle talking about these things. I really don't talk about, I guess I have more lately, been more open to, but with few people. But I also keep few people in my life. I keep a tight circle, so I do feel comfortable talking to my circle about these kind of like more esoteric ideas. And most people in my circle are also on the same page, like with these esoteric ideas. focus, but I've just been able to grow more and more into myself, and my inward self has become much more outward facing. And I think in turn that kind of comes across, it comes across as if it's new when it's not, but it's fine. I try not to downplay. I realized the other day I really have a thing about worrying about being a know-it-all. And it is because things like kids said to me when I was little, and I'm starting to like really look at that because I don't correct people or insert my opinion or like say like, oh yeah, like, no, I know that sometimes, or afraid because I am smart. This is like, and see how hard it is for me to talk. See how hard it is for me to say that I'm smart. It's so hard for me to express that, like, I have a smart and a sharp and like academic brain. And I know a lot of things and I absorb a lot of information. And that's just kind of how my brain works. But it's hard to say that right now because of that fear of being a know-it-all. Wow. Because I just know things. And so a lot of the times I think that I play down how smart that I am, or that I know things, or that I'm into certain things, or let people explain things to me that I already know, because I don't want to, because I guess I want to seem dumber than I am. Anyways, this is what self-growth is all about: unpacking these things, looking at yourself, being honest with yourself, and getting real. Okay, cards have definitely been coming out. Sorry, but I haven't been focused. That's why I haven't been taking them. I already did shuffle and like cleanse this deck, but I very much trust that the message that is meant to come out to share with us today is going to come out. This is a message for anybody tuning in that resonates with it. If you don't resonate with it, don't take it. There's a lot of energy. I don't know if you're watching, you've seen all the cards coming out. There's a lot of energy, and maybe that means that a lot of people are watching this. I don't know. There's my ego, but you have to know your ego in order to understand it and in order to conquer it. Anyways, what a beautiful card that has come out. The Threshold. Wow, the Threshold. I don't know if you guys can see it. The Threshold. I am going to read from the description for you guys. This is the archetypes, the wild unknown archetypes from Kim Kranz. She just writes such beautiful things, and you can tell that she put so much research into creating this deck, but it's beautiful. Before I read it, the Threshold, just as a message for us, especially with the Bardo on the bottom, which is all about kind of like the underworld or the in-between. I think that there's a message here for us, for someone, for you, about being on the precipice of something. There's orange, there's yellow, they're standing on the edge here. And then the Threshold is a gateway, and this is making me think about, I didn't talk really much about, but it pops up in my head, about my move and how all of those things happened at the same time, and it was just like meant to be and all working out. And I was really trusting my intuition and trusting the universe. And it's funny, I kind of kept referring to the summer as a portal. It's because of the way that I look at the calendar year in my head and the way I visualize summer. And I was looking at it in my head as like this chunk of time, and is like, just, stops here, and like this is your portal to like your new life almost. So maybe there is an idea you have, or an idea you're going to have. It can also be literally, right, like a room, somewhere you're going into. Could be somewhere you feel excluded from. Let's read, and then I feel like that's going to give us some takeaways. So the door, the gate, the initiation. We cross thresholds continually, consciously and unconsciously. Doorways, gates, and entryways grace our path on a daily basis. When this card arises, it signifies that the precipice you stand upon is not your typical one. However, did I say precipice when I said that card earlier? I've read this definition like before, but like a long time ago. I just want to say I didn't like read this and then pull that card and go like precipice. Like that, I think is just a little bit of like a coinky-dink, which is funny. You stand upon is now not your typical one. However, you have arrived at a threshold of initiation here to usher you into a new reality. It requires you to leave behind the you that you thought was so well formed. A new frontier calls. This is not easy work. Threshold initiation means a part of you will be lost in order to make space for what is next. A metaphorical death must occur. This is the transformation. This is why this is coming up. Some may not recognize you. You may struggle to recognize yourself. The ground seems to crumble as you free fall into your new reality. This is a liminal realm. One step, dear friend. Just take that one necessary step toward the future that calls you. Wow. Crossing a threshold may not always be voluntary. Sometimes you are thrown across the boundary through circumstances far beyond your control. Either way, we cannot go back. In Hindu mythology, Ganesh is the ultimate gatekeeper. Look at the great elephant god for support. Hecate, Janus, and Mention are also watching over you, right? So it's like, so we are talking about like this liminal space, this initiation. Something is coming forth, and what I'm talking about with this transformation and what I had to do and now delighting in this transformation is that you have to constantly be ready to stand at a threshold. Wow. And you have to be ready to be thrown across, or if you are thrown across, to embrace it. This is also really giving me the Fool card energy, right? Standing on the edge of the cliff, being naive in a way that is exciting and freeing because you're trusting what will come next. You're trusting that leap of faith. You're trusting that when you take the step over the threshold or over the cliff, somebody's going to catch you, or the floor is going to be there, or a step up or a step down is going to be there. You know, whatever it is. If this is resonating with you, this is just confirmation that whatever transformation you're experiencing or about to experience is meant to happen for you. You are meant to embrace it. And the more resistance you have towards it, the harder you will be. Harder you will be. That's interesting. The harder it will be, right? I've kind of had to take on that mindset of accepting challenges because I have been pushed through a threshold before. I've been shoved and thrusted into that change, and it is harder to fall than to just embrace it and take a step. Wow. So God bless. If I ever say God bless, it's not in like a religious way. It's like in a cultural. Hopefully that resonated with someone. If not, it definitely resonated with me. So maybe it was just for me. Who knows? But I am going to be pulling a card for my own practice and like practicing my practice. LOL. And for you guys, I thought it would be interesting and hopefully it resonates. If not, you can skip it. Timestamps below. Love you. A new segment that we're going to do in Babblings 2.0 is Events Corner. Current news, current events, talking about what's going on, my thoughts and opinions. This segment's going to be different every week. I knew when I came back that I could not put out an episode without addressing Gaza and Palestine. Like, I knew that I could not do that. Morally, ethically, I could not put something out to like the public and not say something about that. Whether one person listens to this or 20 people listen to this. So, of course, this Events Corner is just all about recognizing what's going on in Palestine. There has just been horrific devastation, and there is things going on around the globe. This is clearly taking front stage since October. Let me pull up. I have some quick stats for you guys, the most recent stats. So the most recent stats updated as of like an hour, 2 hours ago. In Gaza, at least 32,623 people have been killed, including 13,000 children. 75,092 people have been injured. More than 8,000 people are missing. And those are just, what's being reported. That compared to the amount of people that have died since October 7th. In Israel, 1,139 people, 8,730 people injured. Those are the numbers. That's the reality. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I have no idea how you couldn't know, but I won't say that you've been living under a rock because I don't want to push you away, but you really need to educate yourself. Here's a little bit of tough love. Go ahead, get your Google out, figure it out. Because I actually knew about, I mean, this is the peace in the Middle East that we've been talking about for decades, right? And so when this came to light, I'm like, yeah, this has been going on. And I was actually a little unfazed by it, and that's a lot of just being like cynical and living in this day and age. But I think because in my head I knew that there was this conflict going on, I was a little unfazed by it, and it took me a minute to be like, oh, this is really ramping up, this is getting really intense, it's getting really crazy. And just because something has been going on doesn't mean it's not worth being addressed. It's never too late to stand up and say, that's not right, right? It's never too late to educate yourself more and to be more dialed in and to understand what's going on. I mean, even just around you and like in your own neighborhood. I may not have said it, but obviously free Palestine. I mean, if there's anything you're going to know about me, you need to know that, I'm anti-racist, I'm anti-Zionist, I'm anti-capitalist. I am here for the revolution. I am here to change our society and our structures and our systems that are so deeply flawed. And I'm not above, or I'm not against violence to end the sake of violence. I'm just not. And I think it's really hard when people use these tactics. The media uses it. Israel used it when the first attack happened to try to, justify actions they were taking, whatever. Children were killed. Yes, since October 7th, 13,000 children have been killed in Gaza. And for decades, I think like 70 years, children have been dying in Gaza at the hands of the Israel government. That's just the facts. And so we can't cry morality or morality police or say you don't care about children because you're not condemning Hamas or whatever. And I'm actually going to talk about that later. But that's one of the things that upholds white supremacy, is forcing us to have empathy for the people that are clearly in power, or pulling that morality card. Israel is the power here. They are the large army. They have the capability. They are the ones that are able to stop this, right? That's just a fact. And so we can't take away the fact that they have the power to do something, or ignore the fact that they have the power, or give them grace, or, try and empathize for them because of morality or children dying or whatever. No, people use that to shut you down. People say, oh, our children are dying, or, oh, you support a terrorist attack, or blah, blah, blah. People say those things to shut normal people down. And so this is for all of the people that are like, don't really know how to deal with this, don't even know like where to begin. This isn't for people that like understand the issue or whatever. This is for people that don't understand the issue and shut down when you get approached with that kind of response. When your like initial thought is, wait, that's not okay, or what's going on, and you get shouted back, they're anti-Semitic, or, children are dying in Israel, like all this different stuff. People then shut down, right? It's the same way when like nobody wants to be called like anti-Semitic, or nobody wants to be called racist, especially people that aren't, right? But just because you aren't doesn't mean you're not ignorant. And so to be faced with the prospect of potentially being called anti-Semitic by questioning or standing up for Palestine, I think freezes people. And that's why there's not this like large mass, larger than what it is, nationwide cry out. I'm probably going to have to really piece this together because my brain is going in a million different directions. What I'm trying to say is, don't let people in power intimidate you from speaking out by using emotional like manipulation, or like pulling on, your so-called morality, because that's what upholds white supremacy. I'm going to talk about this not next week, but maybe in a couple weeks, the royal family. But like, this is controversial, but like Queen Elizabeth wasn't, and it shouldn't be controversial, but like Queen Elizabeth was not like entitled to be mourned. Nobody's entitled to be mourned, especially if you've done bad things, especially if you uphold such a dangerous system and have profited off of slave labor and colonialism. You know, you don't just automatically get respect to be mourned. Sorry, I just don't believe that. And I think that that's what keeps us from addressing the problems. Well, now she's dead, now we can't address it. No, we still need to address it. And, you know, now more than ever to make sure that it doesn't keep happening. People in power being entitled or assumed to more empathy than like, they would never empathize with us. Queen Elizabeth wouldn't give a shit if I died, you know? The stance is free Palestine. Like this, that's not even like, do I even have to like really get into that? Like, obviously. And there's going to be resources down below where you can like read more by people that are more articulate than me, and resources for how you can help and contribute those people in Palestine that need your help. This that I really want to talk about is about how I just see all of these correlations with people that have grown up Jewish in America and Zionism, right? Okay, so being anti-Zionist doesn't mean that you're anti-Semitic. Like, no, that's crazy. Like, it just in the way that every white American or every like white person in the world has to reckon with what their ancestors did, acknowledge it in order to move forward and be better, so too does like the half of the part of the Jewish community that is still proudly Zionist and like against Palestine. And mostly I'm talking about like influencers. And I think it just goes to show like how people did not do the work, because some people did. And I'm thinking of like 2020, right? When we were having these large national conversations about systematic racism and what we're putting Black people through and the cops. We were having like these large nationwide conversations. It was no longer just me and my homies like knowing this shit, talking about this shit. It was nationwide. And when we're having these large conversations, because of the place that I was in, there were a lot of people that, you know, opened their mouths, and I was like, wow, you really are racist. And so I don't want anything to do with you. But I also saw a lot of people that weren't racist, but were looking at themselves, wanting to be better and wanting to like try to dismantle the bias and the unconscious bias that they have in their head and the way that they've grown up in a systemic racist society. And so you saw a lot of like, I think, influencers doing face value work like that, you know. And it's funny because I'm just talking about normal people, you know, that I was worked with and I'm friends with, and like we did a book club, and you know, we shared stories and we really talked and delved into these ideas. These influencers weren't doing that, right? They were posted like the black screen or, you know, whatever they did, or and then made a post or made a video. You know, that's where the work stopped. Otherwise, people like Casey Neistat or Ethan Klein or that one Talia girl on TikTok, if they would have really done that work in this situation, they would have been able to look at it from a lens of like, wow, people that I thought, you know, or the system that I was brought up thinking that I had a right to Israel. Wait a second, I don't. And my ancestors didn't. And they're taking it from people. Like, maybe you could like reckon with that if you had actually done that work, but people actually didn't do that work. And then they continue to not do that work. And until you can see the parallels, until not you, I'm not really talking to you, you know, like if you're watching this, like you get it. I'm just ranting to you. But until they can get it, until they can do that dismantling in their brain, you know, it's what's going to continue to uphold and stop progress. It's just really unfortunate, especially people that, you know, because I'm also talking about people that claim to be not racist. You know, people in 2020 that claim to be anti-racist and put up videos about it and doing different things like that. Fast forward 4 years and you're at like Israel, you're at like Israeli protests. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, you don't get it, you know? I think also the whole Israel situation is a really good case study of how people that are oppressed or victims then become perpetrators, victimizers or abusers or dictators or tyrannical. When the Zionist Jewish community decided they wanted to take back Israel and did that mass extinction, you know, you can see that directly correlates to, you know, the end of World War II and the Holocaust. And this is what happens, right? People who are abused most likely become abusers. That's the way they grew up knowing. It's what they were taught. It's maybe what they, you know, if it's for a romantic relationship or, you know, you're abused as a kid, it's maybe what you think family is like or love is like. You maybe think it's what it's supposed to be in the world. Or you were put down and now you're obsessed with getting your licks back or never being in that position again, that you in turn become that thing that puts you down, right? You're now the oppressor. And I think that's what a lot of people that are, in my opinion, not on the right side of history and supporting Palestine, those that are supporting Israel, I think that that's what they really need to reckon with. Or, you know, there are anti-Semitic people in the world. You know, I'm sure there are Jewish people that have had horrible things said to them. Devastating things happen for anti-Semitic reasons. People are killed. But that doesn't mean that in turn your community can't also be oppressing people. I think that's what you need to stand up for, and I think that's what people need to reckon with in order to move forward. And God bless. God bless has been like my tagline for like a week. I think it's my new thing. I like to have different taglines. Like, I like to really switch it up. All right, so with Easter tomorrow and some other events that have played out within the last year or so, or things that have, I just got the chills, or things that have piqued my interest, let's get into the big topic of today. And that is really purity culture and the demonization of sexuality and religions, and why it's dumb, and how Jesus wasn't a virgin, so like, you don't have to be either. Oh, Selena's sleeping. She's my little baby. Alright, so I was just... Purity culture is something that is just kind of like always on my mind. I think because I definitely grew up in like a Christian community, and purity culture was very much a part of that. I also grew up in the Lifetime era of, you know, every movie's about teen pregnancy and how, you know, it's so awful, and abstinence. Also, my mom, you know, grew up in a very restricted religious community where purity culture was very heavily, and she, you know, got pregnant with me at 19. And I think just as I've gotten older, I've gotten to learn a lot more about what that was like for her. And it was not, you know, me coming into the world was not received well. It was not received well, and it's so funny. You know, as soon as I came, everyone loved me, and I was the first grandchild and whatever, but you know, it was not received well. And it was kind of like a scarlet letter for her. And in a lot of ways, the community and I think her family thought that she was ruined. You know, it was so awful. When in reality, she was an amazing mother. And I had, despite trials and tribulations, you know, we have such a great relationship. And you know, I've grown into the woman that I am today. Besides my own, you know, interest, obviously, I've talked about this a lot before, is I'm very interested in cults and group psychology and different things like that. Religion falls into that, and a way that you can control people is by controlling their sex. You know, and that's not just a religious thing. You can find that in lots of different cults, being either very restricted with sex or being overtly sexual in order to make people uncomfortable. In both ways that you can really control people and control their urges and their emotions and you know, how they interact with the world, really. how they think about themselves. And then more recently, Ruby Franke, who is a YouTube mommy vlogger, or was, she was a Mormon mommy vlogger. She had the YouTube channel 8 Passengers, because it was her and her husband, and they have 6 kids, and it was all about her raising her kids. Very dark rabbit hole if you want to go down it. She actually got arrested. Her and her business partner got arrested at the end of the summer, like summer 23, for aggravated child abuse after her youngest son escaped her business partner's home. Was able to find a neighbor to get help. The 911 call that neighbor placed is devastating. This man is clearly devastated by the state that this child is in. I'm not going to get into it too much, but know that what they did to these children are considered war crimes. This is how awful that they treated these children. I'm talking, like waterboarding, gashes down to their bones from being restrained. It's awful and disgusting. But a big part of that is Jodi Hildebrandt, who was her business partner, and she was a Mormon therapist turned life coach for a multitude of reasons. If you're really interested in this, I'm going to link people down below. There's so many good, hours and hours of content that, you can go down this rabbit hole, and then call me and, we can chat, because I need someone who's, on the same level as me that knows, what's going on in the Mormon in the crazy Mormon world. I need somebody who is also following this, because I'm what is happening? Because it's constantly happening. It's not just this family. It's a kind of a crazy phenomenon. Anyways, she was supported by the Mormon Church, and the Mormon Church was actually funneling her clients, and oftentimes subsidizing payments for those clients. So that's all very interesting. All that to say that it is very religious based, and it is based in this extreme fundamentalist religious belief of distortion that Jodi has, and that people could be, and it's really sinful, right? People are distorted, and they need to be, by any means necessary, brought out of that distortion or punished for that distortion. And so these children were distorted. And I don't think necessarily for these children there is a specific sexual component. However, when Jodi was first arrested, she did state in court that her one child needed to be away from others because they were a sexual predator and had already R-worded multiple children in the neighborhood. I mean, we're talking about children under 12 and under. We're talking about a 9 and a 12-year-old that she's talking about, and if these children do have access to child, P, or are acting in these behaviors, I mean, it speaks to a larger home issue, right? So either way, it comes back to Ruby being a psycho person. But also, in a previous YouTube video from a couple of years ago, her oldest son had gotten in trouble and had lost his room and was sleeping on a beanbag. And they said it was for a prank, but I really think that it was for maybe getting in trouble for something like looking up pornography, or being curious about something. But those are also normal teenage behaviors, right? Being curious about sexuality and sex and wanting to get into it. Those are normal sexual behaviors that, the Mormon Church specifically demonizes. And this is where we get into purity culture, because especially in Mormonism, and this is not me saying this is me hearing this from Mormons, having sex or having any sexual thought or inclination is next to murder. And so you can almost see how Ruby, if that is true, and she believes her children are distorted because they're maybe sexually curious or did something that she perceived to be sexually curious or distorted or whatever, or inappropriate, when probably it was maybe an age-appropriate behavior, you could see how, if in her brain she's been led to believe that that is next to murder, you can see how someone can go to a place of doing anything to correct that behavior or that distortion. Obviously, for Ruby, that was starving her children. So, there's a Lori Daybell case, and then there's also just lots of information about religious institutions participating and having many culprits of sexual abuse, or this hidden like depravity. And a lot of it comes, I think, from this like tempered, that's not the right place, from this like repressed sexual energy. And a lot of that comes from purity culture and from religions demonizing sexuality, especially female sexuality. I mean, really anything that is not a white straight man sexuality is demonized, within our culture. And a lot of that is because of, the religious institutions that the society that we're currently living in has, based a lot of their culture, rules, norms, laws off of. Oh my god, my nose! Oh, hold on, I need to blow my nose. As always, anything that I reference, especially like scholarly articles or papers, are going to be linked down below. So let's get into it. What is purity culture? And I went through a couple different articles, and I'm going to be pulling a couple different quotes, and they're all linked below that I got these from. So what is purity culture? Within evangelical Christianity, there is a popular subculture often referred to as purity culture. Purity culture takes a strict biblical stance on sexual purity, teaching abstinence or chastity prior to heterosexual marriage. And obviously that's really important. All of this is not just like the repression of sexuality, but of homosexuality, of any type of expression that is not a stereotypical heterosexual relationship. As I was creating my title for this, Jesus Wasn't a Virgin, I Googled it because I wanted to make sure, I'm not just assuming this, right? People think that Jesus was a virgin. So I Googled, was Jesus a virgin? And the first thing that comes up is celibate. Most Christians, believe Jesus was celibate all of his life. And, and I think that's where using this religion comes back to these kinds of stories, right? Of saying he was celibate. I mean, Jesus wasn't celibate. Jesus wasn't a virgin. I mean, I don't believe so, at least. And I think the biggest case of that is Mary Magdalene. And, she was turned into from a prophet to a prostitute. That's actually one of the articles, I think maybe one of their titles, linked below. And she was really, completely altered in the way that they wrote the Bible and kind of wrote her out of the story and what they would eventually pass off to be Christianity. And so I'm going to get into a little bit of Christian mythology. Hopefully that doesn't offend anybody, but I do see religious beliefs as mythology, in the same context that I see Roman mythology. I think that they're all similar themes meant to represent what was going on at the time, and they may all be the same stories, just rewritten and translated differently to uphold what the people in power wanted at that time. Anyway, okay, so Mary Magdalene. And so this is what I'm talking about, this is where I see, this beginning of the demonization of sexuality, where we're taking Mary Magdalene, who was Jesus, who I kind of believe that, Jesus was probably a real person. But I think a lot of this is mythos, right? This is people just retelling a story. But I think he was maybe a very spiritual person. And I think Mary Magdalene was too. After his crucifixion, she fled, I think, to maybe southern France. She became a priestess and taught her own teachings. There is a book, the Mary Magdalene Manuscripts, I think is what it's called. It's not an actual translation, I think, of any of her teachings. I think it's somebody wrote it because they thought they were actually talking to her. So take that with a grain of salt, take that or leave that. But she did flee and become a priestess and was teaching esoteric teachings after Jesus' crucifixion. So I think that that's interesting and kind of plays into the theories that I have of them being a very spiritual, esoteric kind of group, as in him and his prophets. It wasn't it was changed, but it's believed that they were really more of husband and wife, or courtesans, or whatever that's called, but that they were equals more, and that they were sexual partners. Part of some of the Magdalene teachings are that Jesus received enlightenment through sex, and that Mary and him, helped each other find that enlightenment through sex together, which is just an interesting take. But all that to say, I think that does not correlate with the Christian mythos that we know now of him being, a celibate kind of monk almost. So that goes too, right? So when the people that were in charge and wanting to spread this religion in order to hold power over people, they realized, the men are in charge. So Mary Magdalene can't be Jesus' equal, that they were fucking all the time and she was actually really smart and like teaching him shit. No, like she was a prostitute, And then furthering the idea of, sex work being negative, turning sex work into something negative. That's all, happening at the same time as these like conservative Christian beliefs are being disseminated, like to control populations. And from that, Christianity as we know it today is born. And in the 1970s is actually when purity culture really started to ramp up. Let me see, I have a thing here. Yeah, 1970s really started to gain momentum. The evangelical purity movement grew in popularity during the 1990s and 2000s, targeting youth groups across the country. Purity culture has become the term used for the evangelical movement that promotes a biblical view of sexual purity by requiring strict adherence to sexual abstinence before marriage and supporting only heterosexual, married, and monogamous forms of sexual activity. And what is the purpose of this, right? The purpose of this is gender and sexual control, right? Because the end goal, once again, is a monogamous heterosexual relationship. And before you get there, the idea is that you can partake in nothing sexual whatsoever. And again, like I said, right, that's how we control people. We control people through their sex, and we control people through their identity and through their gender identity. We can keep them conformed. And in this system that the people in power and that are benefiting from want you to stay in the system, right? They want you to stay in the church. They want those people there. They want you to be a heterosexual couple and to produce babies. And in most cases, they want you to produce as many babies as possible, especially the more fundamentalist you get. It can get very dark because they want to create, an army to bring God back to the world. Or it could also be, the more babies you have, then the more people they marry, the more babies they have. And ultimately, who is that funding? That's funding, the religion. The more people, more money. Right? They want to create that sex negative response in you. Have a sex negative versus a sex positive response. Having a sex positive response, sexuality means that you're encouraging of, consensual sexual activities. Consensual sexual activities, and that you're open to that and that you feel positive about that. These people in power, these religious structures want you to have a negative response, a sex negative response to sexuality, which is, that it's harmful, that it's shameful, that it's ridden with guilt. And if you are able to have someone really focused on how guilty they might be if they participate in one of the most natural human instincts, if someone is worried about that and think about how much brain space that consumes, how much control that takes, and how much control you must learn over yourself, and how that just easily fits you into the system that they want you to fit into, and not see everything else going around you because you're so consumed with this guilt, because you're gonna want to have sex. Unless you're asexual, you're gonna want to fuck. Sorry. You're gonna want to fuck. I want to fuck. You want to fuck. We want to fuck. Okay? It's natural and it's normal and it's a human instinct to want to have sex or to have sexual desire, to have sexual thoughts, to have kinks, to have fantasies. These are natural things that are just going to occur without us inviting it in. As you grow, your body's going to develop, those hormones are going to be there, and it's just a natural thing that's going to happen, that is going to come up. And so to make it something that is not natural, to make it seem like something that that it is something you can control, and that you should, and then if you don't, you're a bad person. And in many cases, especially in fundamentalist communities, you will be kicked out of this community and have no one. Think about the mental anxiety, the mental guilt, and the harm that is to try and control yourself that much. And then once again, you're distracted. And these people in power want to keep you distracted so that you're not paying attention to what they're doing or how they're also doing the same thing to other people. They also want you to feel isolated. So by creating this stigma, people aren't going to talk about it. In your community, your peers, they're not going to want to admit to having the same desires as you or the same thoughts or curiosities, because for them to admit that also comes with all of the shame and guilt that has bred into them. And so they may in turn turn on you and maybe tell on you, even though that they have those same thoughts and feelings, because you've been bred into this society where in the Mormon case, and obviously there's a range of this, but could be, especially in the Mormons case, you could be potentially engaging in something that is next to murder, when really it's the most natural human instinct. And to turn us against ourselves is the ultimate power. To turn us against our own natural instincts and to make it seem bad, or that we're not disciplined or smart enough or righteous enough to not have sexual urges or instincts, is evil. To turn people against themselves in that way and against their own natural desires, I think is really evil and extremely harmful. And you can see how it continues to affect people into adulthood and how they approach relationships and how they approach sex and how they can consent versus not consent. And do they even know about consent? All you're teaching is purity and abstinence, and it gets very weird. It also can get very weird in the fact of, a lot of different cultures within purity culture thinking the dad, has some authority over the daughter's purity. This idea that because you're my father, you have authority over my body is disgusting, and it becomes normalized, but that is exactly it. Having control over your body just in the way that the priest or the head of the church has control over everyone's bodies as well. That same kind of patriarchal thing trickles down, right, into our homes. This episode and next week's episode, really, if you created a Venn diagram, there's a huge overlap section, because next week I'm going to talk a lot more about trigger warning, about like child abuse and how we're failing kids, not just in church, but in schools. And I'm also going to be touching on the Nickelodeon documentary. Look out for that. But a lot of this intersects, right? Because a lot of it is the same personality type at the top, allowing all of this behavior and control to happen underneath them because it serves them in some way, whether it be in a church or Dan Snyder on set of Nickelodeon. So some harmful effects with purity culture and the problem. I've got a little excerpt for you here. The biggest problem resulting from purity culture were the shaming messages embodied by some participants. Oh, so this is from an article. Let's see. Wait, which one is this? This is from, and it's down below, linked down below. The article is titled Upholding White Supremacy, Decolonizing Purity Culture, Gendered Racism, and White Idealization in Evangelical Christianity. This is actually a really cool article. They took some different participants that are not white, so women of color, and just asked them lots of different questions about their experience with purity culture, how they experience purity, how it's harmed them, and it is looking at, the intersectionality of how it's harmful on women, purity culture is, but then how it's harmful on women that are not white, and how purity culture ultimately is used to uphold white supremacy. From that article, this is that excerpt. The biggest problem resulting from purity culture were the shaming messages embodied by some participants and the resulting anxiety, depression, and chronic post-traumatic stress former participants experienced as they pursued adult relationships. Many people who were taught to abide by purity culture felt ill-equipped to handle intimate or sexual relationships, as many were told to not even think about sex until marriage. The assumption that one should never have sexual thoughts when attempting to choose a lifetime spouse is deeply problematic and potentially emotionally traumatic. A person's nervous system registers an emotional trauma as a physical trauma. Many purity pleasures' sexual responses became hindered in their adult relationships. And, I've seen this and I've had talked in some personal cases with people, and I see this a lot when I'm looking at these larger cases of people having, how do you go from never think about sex, never ever ever talk about it, never ever, have a sexual urge or desire in your life, to now you're married and in your heterosexual relationship, which was the goal. Congratulations, you completed it. Go ahead and have sex. How do you undo that conditioning, which in most cases is at least 18 years, if not more, depending on when you're getting married? How do you undo that conditioning and all of a sudden allow your sexual urges to happen? It's really hard and it's unrealistic. And that gets people into situations when they're in relationships with partners that are not sexually compatible, and people end up getting assaulted because they don't understand consent and what they want or what they don't want. It often leads to people being abused, more likely in relationships, because they've never had a chance or learned a boundary. They just knew no, and now it's yes. It's very destabilizing, and to go back to that want of control over us, it's very destabilizing and really affects people's mental health and people's self-worth, because now I am supposed to be sexual and I can't produce those feelings, those urges, or find a way to do it without feeling the shame that I've always felt and have been taught to feel. Now I'm ashamed because I can't do it, when once before I was ashamed because I could, And it keeps people in that cycle of staying in potentially harmful or relationships that do not help them blossom, do not help them become the person that they want to become. You stay stifled. Sexuality, sex is meant to be expressed, and demonizing it and taking it away from us only takes away all of those other things that make us us and our personality, and it makes us ashamed of something that is so natural. You can't stop something that's natural. So why be ashamed of it? Why hide it? Obviously, everybody's sexuality is different, and the way that you present yourself sexually is going to be different. I always dressed probably a little like what people would consider sluttier, but like riskier, or showed more skin, and I always had boobs and hips, so people always probably thought I was trying to be sexier than what I really was. But I've always been comfortable expressing my sexuality until and my femininity until I did have trauma, and then it makes it harder to want to express that. And I've felt how that does chip away at your personality, that does chip away at how you express yourself creatively and passionately and lovingly, and create intimate bonds, not just sexually, but just, emotionally intimate. Cutting off your sexuality is cutting off a essential part to who we are as people and as humans, and what we're meant to enjoy and desire. And turning desire into shame and making people feel bad about that is how you control them, especially when you're telling people that you know the right way and you're living by the right way, when most of the time those people in power are not living by what they preach, right? And most of the time, they're actually pretty awful abusers, hiding under the guise of a saint in order to stay in power, in order to continue to commit abuse. Going back to how purity culture is upholding and supporting white supremacy, because a lot of these imagery that you're given in these evangelical communities or in the media, and the media just trickles down from all of this anyways. What's supposed to be secular, is usually not, whatever. And that in this comment, this idea of purity comes with this idea of whiteness. And in this article that I was reading, a lot of the participants, they asked them to visualize purity. And a lot of them are honest in saying, what they visualized was probably like a standard white woman. Let me read some of this. As women of color, all 5 participants expressed uneasiness about envisioning white women as their unconscious representation of the ideal pure woman. For example, Tanya, a Black woman, stated that the first thing that came to her mind was a white woman and was like, oh, wow, that's still there. It's still in my head. So that's what I feel like, disappointment and shame. Similarly, Lonnie, who's Native Hawaiian, stated, it's concerning as hell because why didn't I see a Hawaiian lady? Notably, the guilt appeared to be specific to envisioning of a woman of Eurocentric features and was not associated with the perceived guilt or lack thereof on the part of the participation, and was not associated with any perceived purity or lack thereof on part of the participant. And so here's where we get into that intersectionality, right? So besides just being a woman and feeling your sexual urges being repressed, you're then also a woman of color, feeling that not only do you need to repress your sexual urges, but you also need to try and change yourself to look like that white body, to look like that embodiment of purity. And what you look like is not purity. And that's that another layer of shame, of guilt, of unworthiness on top of purity culture and wanting to enforce, right, that white standard. And so this goes back to that idea, right? Jesus wasn't a virgin, and this isn't all coincidence that, the Bible was written from a certain perspective, or that these large religious groups are teaching it from a certain perspective, but being a more white-centered or purity culture of Mary Magdalene, her sexuality not being empowering and intelligent and spiritual, it actually being negative and, what people want to think of as dirty and as, a means to an end and not what it actually is, and that is a whole other level of, I did a whole episode on sex workers. Go listen or watch it. I'm for sex workers, so I'm not trying to because I'm having the way that I'm having to describe them of changing her, from being prolific to a prostitute or being a priestess to a prostitute puts prostitution in a negative connotation that I don't feel comfortable with and that I'm not trying to make. That's all that I'm trying to say. I probably didn't even need to say that. You probably got it. But, they're doing these things purposefully to keep themselves in power, to keep these white men in power, to then spread and make their empire larger, which, white supremacy and colonialism and purity culture is at the center of all of this. Dominant hegemonic. How the fuck do you say how do you say that? Dominant hegemonic religious doctrines such as the purity movement center the promotion of white middle-class families through espousing white norms of femininity, purity, and marriage. Thereby, the impact shaming women of color for sexual urges in their natural bodies was inseparable from colonial origins, which first imposed Eurocentric ideals on the female body and concepts of purity through the gaze of white colonizers who made no attempt to understand the cultural norms and practices of the groups they sought to colonize, right? Because a lot of indigenous groups had very powerful sexual rituals, or they had such large and all-encompassing and views on sexuality and embracing and empowering sexuality, right? And these colonizers came in not to learn maybe why they were doing in that and why they were upholding it, but then they come in to take it away, right? To uphold their own ideas of their own image. Colonialism has always operated through gender, and the legacy of this mindset remains within the purity culture doctrine and can only be recognized when women of color have been centered in their lived experiences. That again is from the article that I talked about where they brought the different participants in and they're looking at the intersectionality. But I pulled that out because it was really getting at what I'm trying to get at. And I'm trying to just create this large picture for you of this idea of repressing sexuality and how it seeps into everything. And it was done purposefully, right? I think we all need to wrap our heads around things being done purposefully. It didn't just happen. It wasn't just circumstance. It wasn't just how things unfolded over time. People purposefully, turning us against our own sexuality, turning people to this center, this like white body and centering whiteness in order to uphold their colonialist views, to expand their empire. And ultimately, that just comes back to money, sex, and power. And anything in this world that is tainted, you can trace back to money, sex, and power being what anybody in power is getting out of being in power, And it's getting at this idea that I have, of changing this idea of Jesus and turning him into this celibate monk and Mary Magdalene into this whore, instead of, a priestess and an equal of him, and then using those teachings to repress sexuality, to uphold purity culture, to promote it, and to create this idealization of something that is just like not true. It's just not true. I can't imagine that that's true. And ultimately, it's mythology. It's this mythos. It's these maybe written accounts that we have of something that maybe happened in order to teach us how to be a better person is ultimately what any religious teaching is. And they changed it, what they changed it to, in order to control people and in order to control society and put the systems in place that they want to be in place. Controlling gender, controlling sexuality and sexual expression, to control these things and to control people and how they're going to live their lives and ultimately where they're going to spend their money and who they're going to look to for guidance. Kind of all comes down to that. So, with Easter coming up, I just thought what an excellent time to remind everyone that it's all bullshit. And if you are someone that grew up in purity culture, I am here for you. If you need a sounding board, or if you just needed someone to assure you that you're not wrong, and if you have been ostracized from your community, maybe you're a part of a fundamentalist community and you've been ostracized, you are not guilty, you are not wrong, you are not shameful, you are not sinful, you are a normal person who either wants to have sex, who has thought about having sex, who wants to kiss somebody, who wants to love somebody. You want to be in the not heterosexual relationship, you want to be not in the binary gender system, you want to express yourself in a different way. All of that comes down, like, purity culture is the restraint and the restriction of all of those things in order to ostracize people, and herd us around like sheep. No, if you're feeling shameful, you don't have to. And I encourage you to maybe see someone to kind of debunk, help you deprogram your brain from thinking that way, because it is really hard, and it's not something that you can just flip a switch, like I said, and all of a sudden be like a sexual goddess when shame is all you've known all of your life. And ultimately, our communities, our systems, our societies would be nothing without sexuality and expression of sexuality. It would be boring, it would be colorless, but also where would people procreate if they wanted to procreate, if we wanted to keep humanity going? Keeping people from orgasms, that's evil. That's evil. Forget, everything else. Like, just the fact that, like, people want to keep people from orgasming is evil and deceitful and a control tactic. Take it from someone. Take it from someone who... Take it from someone who was in a relationship that may have had some sexual manipulation, okay? It's a control tactic. It's a control tactic. To keep us down, to keep our head to the grind, to keep our nose to the grindstone, and to keep us blinded from all their little bullshit and their own depravity, because we're too busy worried about our shame, which is like normal shit. Anyways, that was this episode. I'm just really babbling now. Celine, tell everybody you love them. Tell everyone you love them. Oh, she's purring, so she is telepathically telling everybody that she loves them. I love you too. This has been Babblings of a 20-something. Check in next week for episode 2.1, Quiet on Set in Schools and at Home. Why do we continue to fail children? See you there.